So most of you probably know who I am by now. I'm Cathy Costello, and I am the widow of our state labor commissioner, Mark Costello. Mark and I were married for 33 years. We would have had our 34th anniversary this January. We have 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Our second child and our oldest son was diagnosed with mental illness 8 years ago. And we began to see little things in him that were unusual. But he was always loving and kind and considerate, never violent. In fact, many people told us that boy is going to be a priest. He had a love for God. He had a love for others. But as adolescence came and went, and teen years came and went, and his late years came and went, we began to notice that he would pace around and talk to himself and have arguments with someone in the shower. And I said, Christian, I think we might need to go to the doctor. Are you aware you're doing these things? And sometimes he said yes, and sometimes he said no. In the beginning, he would go with me, and he would try the medication, but he was always leery of it. If the doctor said, Christian, let's start you out on 400 milligrams of Seroquel, which is a mood stabilizer, because his initial diagnosis was schizoaffective, or I guess as the professionals say, schizoaffective. I've been corrected on that, but that's not what our ear hears. Progressed to bipolar, then to bipolar with psychosis, then eventually to schizophrenia, then to schizophrenia with psychosis and paranoia. The thing about our son, as we spiraled down mental illness, is he was afraid to take medication because he thought we were poisoning him. It's very interesting to note in this discussion, as I was thinking about preparing this talk, that when my son was medicated after a psychotic break, he'd say, wow, Mom, I was really acting crazy. I did some weird things. I said some weird things. I feel so much better now. Please, don't let me stop taking my medication. If I stop taking it, help me get back on it. But try dealing with someone who's in psychosis, who is off of their medication, and you remind them of that, and they say, you're trying to poison me. You're evil. Dad works for the government. You're spying on me. You have cameras in my apartment. You have cameras in my car. You are a bad person. The government is bad. This is what we began to hear over the last 3 years. With the AOT treatment, one of the criteria is someone who has established a pattern that shows multiple hospitalizations and resistance to medication. And someone asked me recently how many times our son had been hospitalized. Well, after looking at the checkbook and $150,000 out of our own pocket and the trips within the state and out of the state, I was stunned to find out he'd been in and out of facilities long-term for a few days to a week to 5 weeks to 3 months, 10 times. 5 of those were in the last 12 months. You know, my husband, Mark Costello, was one of the bravest, most courageous, most outspoken men I've ever known, and I think many of you in this room know that. He loved truth. He loved a spirited conversation, even if he didn't agree with you, even if you had a difference of opinion on policy. He was always excited to talk with somebody about solutions, how to make things better in Oklahoma, in our government, for our neighbor, for the mentally ill that suffer, for the wage earner in Oklahoma who can't work when 85% of our mentally ill population cannot hold a job. But the bravest I ever saw my husband was when he tried to save the life, day in and day out, of our mentally ill son. And none of you knew this was going on behind our closed doors. The man was on his knees every day praying for his son, every day praying for a solution. He wouldn't give up. 10 weeks ago, our son called us up and said, hey, let's get together. And Mark said, I would love to. I'm actually looking at a work program for you on 23rd in Pennsylvania through Health and Human Services, because Mark believed that work affords its own reward. He believed that when the mentally ill person was working, it boosts his self-esteem. And his thought was, if you feel a little bit better about yourself, you may be more apt to take your medication, and you'll be more apt to engage in relationships with your family, with your friends. Everyone wants friends. Everyone wants to belong. Everyone wants to be part of a community. You're a part of a community here in the Senate. It's a great thing to go to every day, to have something that you're doing that's productive. When you're sick and your brain doesn't feel good and people don't want to be around you, you're lonely. And lonely people, they deteriorate. And sometimes they become hopeless, and sometimes they commit suicide. So we met with him 10 weeks ago on a lovely August Sunday early evening at Brahms. And I said, hey, son, I can't decide to come with your dad. And he was surprised but delighted. He shook his father's hand. He hugged me. And I said, we're going to start a healthier eating program. We want to go over to Luby's. You want to go get something to eat? He didn't want to eat, but I did. So we went over to Luby's. And we began to have the usual small talk. How are you doing? Your hair looks great. Do you remember so-and-so? They got married. They had a baby. I would try to bring back memories of better days to him. And in the middle of the conversation, he stopped and he looked at us and he said, oh, by the way, I quit taking my medication. And he got up and he went to the bathroom, and Mark turned and looked at me. I can still see it. Oh, no, that's not good. We knew the history of when Christian was off of his medication. We knew that he could be suicidal, and we knew he could be manic. He came back to the table. We went to put air in my tire, and we went to Brahms. And he said, Mom, will you stay in the car? I want to talk to Dad privately in Brahms about my girlfriend. I said, sure. Your sister's starting college tomorrow in Mississippi, University of Mississippi. She's here today. She's not at college. She's grieving her father's death. And I was texting her. She'd just been to church, and she was so excited about the school, and she loved what she'd heard at church and the people she was meeting. And within about a minute, my husband appeared at my window, slammed his hands on the window, and I looked up, and he is, I thought, covered in a bucket of paint. And the last words I heard him say were call 911. And when I realized, when I looked at him, his throat had been slashed. I didn't know what had happened. I hopped out of the car, and there's my son with a knife. And my husband, like a wounded deer, is stumbling away. And I'm screaming at the 20 people standing there, help me, call 911. And I run up and I put my arms between my son and my husband, and I begged him, Christian, stop, stop. And he takes the knife and he puts it at my throat, and he says, get back, Mom. And I thought, if he cuts my throat, I can't help Mark. I probably don't have enough time to tell you what happened in the next 5 minutes, because it would take 25 minutes. But in the end, I finally got between Christian and Mark, and I grabbed his shirt. We'd circled Brahms. My husband had been stabbed 17 times, 3 times in the face, once in the head, several to the chest and back. And I grabbed the back of his shirt and I said, get in the car, get in the car. I thought if I could get him in the car. Christian came towards us, stabbed Mark some more, hit me. I finally got him in the car. In the front seat of our Toyota Sienna, which we took at the last minute, thank God, because I couldn't have gotten him in his Toyota 4Runner. And I got in the seat behind him and shut the door while other patrons there helped subdue my son. And I put my arms around Mark, and I put my hand on his neck, thinking, I need to put pressure on the wound. And I knew he was dying, and I could hear his lungs collapsing, and I whispered in his ear, I love you, may God forgive you of your sins, and be prepared to go to heaven and meet your Maker. Hold on, sweetheart, you're going to make it. I knew he wasn't. When your carotid artery and your jugular vein are cut, you have, doctor, 3 to 5 minutes? Not much. My husband died in my arms. A few weeks later, our pastor went to visit Christian at the county jail. And who knows if he's medicated? I suspect he is still not medicated because he told the pastor that he was certain that Mark was going to have the FBI interrogate him and have him arrested. But he also told me that Mark had superpowers, and didn't tell me, he told the pastor who relayed to me, superpowers against knives. So he probably wouldn't die. He'd probably be there on Tuesday to give him his money that Mark met him every other week. Last winter, we were in and out of the hospital, September, October, November, December. Griffin, St. Anthony's, the crisis center, in and out and in and out. And I will say I think some of the best care he received was at the crisis center. And there was an amazing doctor there who said, Christian needs court-ordered medication. He's bad. And for a while, he was on court-ordered medication. And he kind of came back to some sanity. And they kept him as long as they were able to and legally able to, and he was back out. So we went through a few months working with a PACT program, and he was taking lithium on his own. But for some unknown reason, just like he had month after month, year after year, he quit taking his medication. Our son would have been a perfect candidate for assisted outpatient treatment. He was happier when he was on medication. He had relationships, and my husband would be alive. We've lost a great man. I've lost my husband and my son. My children have lost their father and their brother. Mark was the baby of 4 children. He has older brother and sisters who are grieving. People of the Department of Labor are still grieving. Some are here today. People in the state are still grieving. I'm still getting cards. One life impacts many, many people. If I can do anything to help another family out there, another wife, another mother, not suffer what my family has gone through, I can't even begin to tell you how horrific it is, only through the grace of Almighty God that I'm even standing here. Because Mark would want me to be here. He would want me to carry this forward. He would want to continue to help and save his son's soul and his mental health and other people. And Mark always wanted to do something great for Oklahoma. He is. He will continue to do something really great. Please give some consideration to this assisted outpatient treatment so we can help families. It is an exhausting, devastating, unbelievable experience to have a family member with a mental illness. Thank you for your time. I appreciate your presence. God bless you all.